Joining me now is Newsweek Senior Editor-at-Large and Article 3 Project Senior Counsel Josh Hammer. Josh, we will speak about the cases against Donald Trump collapsing shortly. The lawfare appears to be almost over. But first to Trump's transition team, and the majority of Americans, as CNN just explained, are optimistic about what the next 4 years will bring. Very different situation to 2016.
Yeah, I think he's up, that is Donald Trump, 17 points compared to where he was at this exact time 8 years ago. Look, it's no small wonder why. There's multiple causes for this, Rita, in my estimation. First and foremost is that, it's funny, the Republican Party at this time, it went through an ideological phase around the time of the Tea Party the Tea Party rise, 2010, 2012. At this point, MAGA has an ideology for sure, and I don't want to downplay that. But right now, I think the Republican Party under Donald Trump is best understood as a party of the opposition. And it is the majority party, but what it does oppose is woke. It opposes wokeism. It opposes radical leftism. And at that point, when you are defined so broadly in opposition to all these various policies and movements that are so wildly unpopular, you're going to be more popular, because guess what? On all these various woke issues, whether it's the open border, whether it's biological men and women's sports, or God forbid, biological men and women's prisons, all these crazy woke excesses, the American people are on the side of civilizational sanity, not the side of civilizational arson. I think a second reason why the Trump transition team is polling so well right now, Rita, is for the very simple reason that Donald Trump has actually appointed a lot of former Democrats to very high-ranking positions. People like RFK Jr., people like Tulsi Gabbard. Heck, it wasn't that long ago that Elon Musk himself was a Democrat there. The list, frankly, goes on and on there. Scott Bessent, his current Treasury Secretary, once upon a time actually worked for a George Soros-funded investment firm over a decade ago. So, Democrats have a lot of reason themselves to actually not necessarily be totally pessimistic about what the Donald Trump administration might bring. Again, the way that I see the Donald Trump presidency and the Donald Trump political legacy more broadly, this is not an ideological right-wing agenda. It is an agenda, and above all, a coalition of the sane and the commonsensical. That's what it is. That's why the approval ratings are so high.
And that's why it was so stupid for so many in the media and so many of his political opponents to characterize him as some sort of extremist, some sort of unique threat to democracy, because as you've just explained, in fact, he's very much mainstream with his positions and his values and the sort of policies he wants to implement. And on that, I want to ask you about the angry, I was going to say crazy, I'll say angry rant of Axios CEO and co-founder Jim Vanderhay, his defense of the media industry. Does he understand why trust in the media has plummeted to these historic lows? We've got now only 1 in 10 Republicans trusting the media. And importantly, and this was pretty critical in the election, I would say, only around 27% of independent voters trust the media. They've cried wolf too many times, Josh.
Yeah, so that's astonishing, right? 27% of independents, the 1 out of 10 Republicans. Frankly, my response to that is, who the heck is in that 10%, and what are you looking at that I am not apparently seeing? I say that, by the way, as someone who works for Newsweek, which is a pretty historic brand in American journalism. But I don't understand what that 1 in 10 people are possibly looking at there. Look, obviously, the Axios CEO doesn't understand what's going on out there. This is an activist organization that is calling itself a news outlet. Unfortunately, what's happening at Axios is basically what's happening out there with anything that calls itself the mainstream corporate media these days. That is why the mainstream media right now has literally its lowest approval ratings than it has ever had in the history of mainstream Gallup Pew American public polling. And unless and until they come to grips with the fact that they are just wildly out of touch, unless they come to grips with the fact that, for example, mass deportations are actually a winning issue for Republicans. Something like 60 to 65% of Americans say they support that agenda. They're freaking out on CNN. They're freaking out on MSNBC. Unless and until you guys actually realize that what you think and what the American people think are two very, very different things, unless and until they actually realize that, Rita, their approval ratings are only going to go further and further into the toilet, I fear.
Absolutely. And Axios itself, like MSNBC and many other far-left outlets, has seen a big dive in their audience share. So I think a lot of that angry rant is motivated by self-interest. Special counsel Jack Smith, his move to have the election interference and classified document cases against Donald Trump dismissed in line with the Department of Justice policy. A US district judge has signed off on dismissing the election interference charges, and another is reviewing the classified document charges. What else can you tell us about this, Josh? Is the lawfare over, or is it just going to be delayed?
So the federal cases appear to actually be over. So those are the two cases in Florida, where I live, and in Washington, D.C. Florida would be the classified documents case in Mar-a-Lago, and the D.C. case is kind of the marquee case, the crown jewel. That's the 2020 case involving January 6th. That is the case that Judge Tanya Chukin actually formally dismissed pursuant to so-called special counsel Jack Smith's motion to withdraw the case there. Now, it's over at a federal level. There are still two state level prosecutions. There's the so-called hush money case in New York City, as well as the Fulton County, Georgia case. That's the one with Fonnie Willis and her former lover, Nathan Wade. It's actually not entirely clear what's happening in Georgia. The Georgia Court of Appeals this past week actually just said that they're not going to hear the appeal from the Superior Court. So it's not entirely clear, procedurally speaking, what's going to happen there. It's probably going to fizzle out of its own accord one way or the other. The big question right now from a lawfare perspective, well, I guess there are two big questions. One is what happens in the New York City case, because Juan Merchan, the very anti-Trump judge, has indefinitely delayed the sentencing, but he hasn't actually dismissed the case in its entirety yet. He should declare a mistrial. This gets to the heart of what the Supreme Court said in the Trump versus U.S. presidential immunity case, which constitutes a conduct that you cannot invoke at a trial setting. So under the clear terms of the presidential immunity case, that case should be declared a mistrial. I think the bigger question, though, Rita, and one that I'm currently thinking a lot about, is what does Donald Trump do day one, January 2025, when it comes to lawfare? You have a lot of people, I think, whispering in his ear saying, be the bigger man, try to just extend a peace pipe there, kumbaya, let's all just move on here. I'm not ready to move on. I am not ready to just move on and just turn the page from the past 2.5 years of them trying to bankrupt, incarcerate, destroy their political opponent in third world sub-Saharan Africa Tin Pot dictatorship fashion. They have made a mockery of the rule of law in this country. They have crossed not just one Rubicon, they have crossed hundreds of Rubicons at this point there. And unless and until they pay some sort of price for that, I fear that when they regain power, which inevitably they will at some unforeseen point, but at some point they will, unless and until you make them feel the price now, the pain, they're just going to double down at a future date.
That is critically important. And it's what the people voted for. That was an issue throughout this election campaign. The lawfare, the way these departments and institutions have been corrupted and politicized and weaponized to go after political opponents. This is an issue that Trump's voters care about. So if he goes in there and decides, well, I've got other things to focus on, we're just going to all hold hands and pretend we're good friends, I think that's entirely the wrong thing to do. And as you said, it doesn't actually see meaningful change. They're just going to try it on again when there's no consequences. So there has to be some consequences for those who misuse their power, misuse their offices to launch this lawfare. And it wasn't just Donald Trump. Of course, he was their number one target, but we've seen school mums who objected to what their children were being taught and were protesting at school board meetings being targeted. We've seen pro-life activists being targeted. So it's bigger than Donald Trump, and I hope he really does not neglect this important area. I want to ask you about California Governor Gavin Newsom. He is a future Democrat presidential candidate, if you ask me, despite the mess that California is in. He's done something incredible. He's excluded Elon Musk's Tesla from a scheme that will offer rebates to electric vehicle buyers. So Governor Newsom's going to introduce this $7,500 EV credit scheme if Donald Trump decides to repeal the federal EV rebates that are in place. But he's going to exclude Tesla, the most popular EV and the one that's actually made in America, made in California, Josh.
Yeah, it's pretty morbidly hilarious, isn't it, actually, that the nation's largest EV manufacturer is being denied a purportedly facially neutral credit for the very simple reason that Elon Musk is a major Trump supporter, or that Elon Musk actually picked up and moved out of Gavin Newsom's California due to Gavin Newsom's policies and relocated to Texas there? It's funny. So, in the Anglo-American legal tradition and right here in our US Constitution, we have something known as a Bill of Attainder. A Bill of Attainder back in the old Star Chamber in medieval England was literally a decree by the king that would single out an individual for punishment without any law actually supporting it. The US Constitution actually clarifies that Congress shall never, ever pass a Bill of Attainder. This is basically what's happening here. This is basically a single-minded Bill of Attainder of sorts that Gavin Newsom is just issuing at Elon Musk. It's coming from nothing other than pure personal pettiness and spite. That is exactly what's going on there. By the way, you mentioned this, but Gavin Newsom is the first governor since California became a state in the mid-19th century to oversee a population decline and California actually losing congressional seats in the U.S. Census. All this has happened under Gavin Newsom's gubernatorial tenure. Again, he's the first governor who's ever been there in the Golden State to ever see a population excess. People have been flocking to California forever until he came into power there. If Gavin Newsom is the best that the Democratic Party has to offer come the next presidential election in 2028, then God help them, because it's not going to go a heck of a lot better than it did the last go around.
Yes, the Californians are fleeing in huge numbers. They're all over Texas and Florida, where you are, and Tennessee. They typically seem to be fleeing to the south. Let's just hope they don't take their politics with them. I want to ask you about the January 6 political prisoners, as some refer to them. But before that, Canadian opposition leader Pierre Poilievre has called out Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, over his role in creating and tolerating anti-Semitism in Canada. The left-wing hate there is fueling riots in Montreal. I'll just quote from what Pierre wrote on X. He said, "You act surprised. We are reaping what you sowed. This is what happens when a Prime Minister spends 9 years pushing toxic woke identity politics, dividing and subdividing people by race, gender, vaccine status, religion, region, age, wealth, saying Canada is a post-national state with no core identity. And while you were dancing, Montreal was burning. We won't let you divide us anymore. Call an election and now. We will fire you and reclaim our citizenship, our values, our lives, our freedom, and most of all, our country." Wow, Josh, that's pretty powerful stuff.
Yeah, that's a fiery statement, and it's a fiery statement that has to be made. I mean, frankly, I was looking at the so-called ratio on the underlying tweet that Justin Trudeau pointed out, that we saw kind of the quote there. I mean, Justin Trudeau was getting so-called ratioed. I mean, he was getting just blown up in the replies there. I mean, Trudeau is going to get demolished the next time that he actually bothers to hold an election there in Canada there. And it's because his policies have fundamentally failed. By the way, it's not just that he's allowing Jew haters in Montreal to firebomb synagogues. He's also now on record as saying that he looks forward to enforcing the International Criminal Court's arrest warrant against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, as if
Yes.
Netanyahu were to visit Ottawa. I mean, is Trudeau literally going to send in the Royal Canadian Mounted Police to round up the Jews? I mean, are you kidding me here? I mean, is this sort of Nazi-esque rounding up the Jews the progressive mentality in the year 2024? I guess the answer apparently is yes. Again, he's going to get his clock cleaned in Canada the next time that they bother to host elections there. This leader of the opposition of the Tories is very, very, very well spoken. I hope he gets back into power the next time that Canada bothers to hold a national election, frankly.
I do like his form. He reminds me a lot of Ron DeSantis. I want to ask you about January 6th. There's been another hole that's been blown in Congress's January 6th investigation, despite the Capitol Police and Justice Department clearing Captain Michael Byrd for shooting protester Ashley Babbitt dead. New information has come to light where Byrd admits to not having sufficient grounds to have opened fire on her, and a new report confirms that Byrd had prior disciplinary and training issues. What more can you tell us about that? And what is going to be the plight of these January 6 prisoners? Some refer to them as political prisoners, and really their cases highlight this two-tier justice system.
So the U.S. Supreme Court had an opinion earlier this year called the Fisher case, U.S. versus Fisher, where they held that a 2002 statute called Sarbanes-Oxley, specifically Section 1512, cannot be used to prosecute the J6ers. That was basically the holding of the case. Now, notably, Jack Smith, who we were just discussing a few minutes ago, Jack Smith decided not to let the Supreme Court ruling affect his indictment against Donald Trump. He actually left those charges in. But when it comes to a lot of the J6ers who were being prosecuted or who are waiting trial or who are currently sentenced under these same statutory grounds, the Biden DOJ has not actually bothered to change or to let out many of these people. And they're acting in many cases in flagrant disregard of the Supreme Court's clear guidance in this Fisher case. Many of these cases, perhaps most or possibly even all of them, honestly, are really just day one easy parting calls, I think, for Donald Trump and Pam Bondi, his soon-to-be Attorney General, come January 2025. Look, was January 6th a good day? No, it obviously was not. Has it been blown out of proportion by anyone remotely resembling anyone on the left? Yeah, of course it has. This notion that it was a Pearl Harbor or 9/11, get the heck out of here. I mean, this latest revelation about Byrd and Ashley Babbitt there is really just the latest data indicating that there. Donald Trump should issue a pardon to basically anyone who's been prosecuted under that same statute I mentioned there, possibly all of them there. Get it done with, out of the way. The left will freak out. Let them melt down. Frankly, who cares?
Exactly. They're going to melt down anyway. Josh Hammer, thanks for your time tonight.
Thank you, Rita.